Before we get started, there will be spoilers for Jujutsu Kaisen and the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. Well, Jujutsu Kaisen is coming to an end. Announced earlier today at the time of recording, the series only has 5 chapters remaining and will formally end with, I assume, chapter 271, releasing as part of Weekly Shonen Jump issue 44 on September the 30th. Author Gege Akutami himself even released a short statement promising a satisfactory final chapter that will maybe, hopefully, please readers of the series. Of course, to some degree, this isn't surprising news. Yuji and his allies have been locked in a fierce showdown with Sukuna now for a long time, and the climax has been fast approaching for months now as characters continued to drop like flies in the face of such overwhelming evil. There isn't really much else for the story to do, to accomplish. There isn't really anywhere else to go. And now, with Yuji himself taking the stand in a big, dramatic, meaningful way, and even managing to connect with Megumi, it certainly seemed as though the stage was set for the finale, and well, we're here. Albeit perhaps a lot sooner than people anticipated. And yet, for me personally, the main sensation this announcement brought is one of immense familiarity. This is a place some of us have been before, and in strikingly similar circumstances. And so, with the ending of Jujutsu Kaisen now on the very near horizon, I wanted to offer a different perspective. I mean, there's bound to be loads of people discussing this news from all angles, but I feel oddly nostalgic about the whole thing. Nostalgic for something I wasn't even happy about. Is that even possible? For this is playing out virtually identically to the end of Bleach back in 2016, and I wanted to get some of my own thoughts down about the way a series ends, what it can mean, especially if you find yourself disappointed or let down by the outcome, and what the future can hold too. This isn't going to be a particularly long video, and I apologise for taking so long to get a second Jujutsu Kaisen video out. I was still figuring out the release cadence, and then everything went crazy with Bleach, the 1000-year Blood War arc anime part 3, but in a way it feels fitting to follow up my first video with one that reflects on the series' impending end, and all that can come after. First of all, I want to look at the overall comparisons to the way Bleach ended and maybe even dredge up some bad memories for myself. It is strange to feel nostalgia for that time period. Even though I wasn't happy with what was going down with the story of Bleach at the time, it still feels like a time period of familiarity to me. Let me take you back to June of 2016. Bleach Chapter 680 had just been released, and to everyone's surprise, it contained a foreboding message, accompanying a surprisingly drab and bleak colour page of Yhwach wielding the Almighty. A Shonen Jump editorial announced to readers that Bleach had just blank chapters remaining. Yes, unlike this situation with Jujutsu Kaisen we're seeing today, they didn't outright tell us how many chapters were left, meaning speculation was able to run rampant. For a week at least. On the one hand, like we're seeing here with Jujutsu Kaisen, it wasn't that surprising. Ichigo was battling Yhwach atop Varvelt, and the Quincy King was now preparing to leave for the Serete to complete his ultimate plan. Yhwach had in fact just killed both Hashwolf and Gerard abruptly, thereby ending the final slate of battles, and yet something was amiss. There was just far too much story left for the series to be realistically ending anytime soon, and yet the events of that week's chapter seemed to counteract that idea. The final 2 Sternritter had just been killed off like that, including Yhwach's right-hand man. And yet, even with that evidence staring me in the face, I comfortably predicted that we maybe had 20 chapters left, 2 volumes, with which to close out the story in a way that wouldn't be perfect, but might at least be satisfying. How wrong I was. Just a week later, with the release of Chapter 681, it was announced that Volume 74 would be the final volume of Bleach. And Chapter 681 already marked the halfway point of that volume, meaning to those of us who cared enough to work it out that we only had, you guessed it, 5 chapters remaining. Upon figuring this revelation out, I was immensely disappointed, as you can see in my old chapter reviews. But more than anything, I was completely blindsided. I had been reviewing the series on a weekly basis since chapter 496 and been reading it diligently every week for many years prior to that. And still, these things can creep up on you. That routine, that story you've been following rigidly for so long can just end like that, slamming everything to a halt and really upending everything you thought you knew, everything you thought would happen, everything you'd imagined was yet to play out. There must be some secret answer to all of this. There must be ways that the many different plot threads will all still be addressed. And where Bleach was concerned, those questions, those plot threads were pretty endless. What about all the missing Bankai? What were characters like the Fullbringers or Isshin and Ryuken actually going to do now? What role were they going to play in the end of the story? What about the Soul King's backstory or Aizen's involvement? Yhwach defeats and drains Ichigo of much of his power in chapter 680, so how could he possibly lose and potentially be killed in less than half a volume from that moment? Well, of course, the rest is history. Bleach really did end with chapter 686. The final fight with Yhwach was condensed and wrapped up in 3 chapters, and the series skipped ahead 10 years for the final 2 chapters to hastily bring the entire saga to a close. Of course, there was a lot going on behind the scenes where Bleach was concerned. Kubo was sick, injured, and tired by the end of the story, and as I've personally matured and grown over the years, these days I'm grateful the series was able to end at all, even if it wasn't what I had personally hoped for. Now, Jujutsu Kaisen hasn't been running for anywhere near as long as Bleach, but the sentiment remains the same. Gege notes in his statement that he's getting to end the series his way, the way he wanted to close it out, and as long as that's true, there's really no greater gift an author can receive. But there's no denying it feels like a lot is missing here, a ton of potential that may be being left on the table and going to waste. Let's very briefly take a look at what some of those plot points might be. For starters, there's the entire subplot of the merger. Kenjaku's original villainous vision to fuse every single human in Japan with Tengen to create a godlike abomination, which Sukuna himself decided to see through after Kenjaku's apparent death. Now, I'm not too surprised this doesn't appear to be happening in any substantial way. The merger is the end of the world scenario, essentially. The outcome where the villains win. Again, to compare it to Bleach, this would be akin to Yhwach succeeding in collapsing all 3 worlds back into one primordial state. No one expected it to happen, because if it did, it would have meant the heroes had lost utterly and completely, something from which there is really no coming back. So, while it is a darkness, a great lingering threat in the shadows, that's its only real purpose, to drive our heroes to succeed against all odds. What is a little surprising to me personally, though, is that Sukuna doesn't seem to have even come close to achieving that goal. In order to effectively build tension at the climax in the finale, the villain often comes a hair's breadth from victory. There needs to be the illusion that our heroes will fail for the story to really have any stakes whatsoever. Again, in Bleach, Yhwach's power begins to decimate the Seirete itself, even bursting free of the Shakonmaku and flooding the entire Soul Society as he seemingly kills Ichigo. It really looks like it could be all over. This is his moment of triumph playing out before us, until after one last big twist, one last hurrah, it isn't, and the day is saved. For as rushed and as wholly unsatisfying as the ending of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc was on many levels, the major beats still played out mostly how you would probably expect them to. Up next is any kind of substantial backstory for Sukuna himself, whether that's a look at the Heian era of sorcery through a flashback or not. This feels a little different to the big flashback that was missing at the core of Bleach's final arc. The 1,000-Year Blood War was lacking in any real contextual history whatsoever, something that is currently being remedied in a big way thanks to the anime. Whereas with Sukuna, it's hard to know just how much more there is to really learn, how much can be gained from spending a significant amount of time on that, though new time periods are always fun to explore. Jujutsu Kaisen has always felt like an incredibly fast-paced story to me, one that doesn't take much time to slow down and revel in its own successes, always pushing on to the next big thing. And this can be a virtue in and of itself, but it does mean that many of the elements that made the story so appealing can easily be left by the wayside. And then of course there's Hakari versus Uraume, the only other fight currently taking place in this arc, the Shinjuku Showdown. We've seen flashes and glimpses of it here and there. It was set up as a major fight before all of this madness really went down, but apart from that, it is occurring entirely off-screen. I can't help but feel like this is going to go in one of two ways. Either it will be totally finished off-screen, maybe we'll be given a final look at a grief-stricken but probably already defeated Uraume as Sukuna inevitably dies, or their fight will somehow be rushed to a conclusion to aid in the main event. In many ways, that second option reminds me of Uryu versus Hashwolf again at the end of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. A fight that should, by all intents and purposes, be extremely important to the current war, and yet was handled incredibly weirdly, generally speaking in favour of another fight at the time. There clearly wasn't enough room for this fight to play out concurrently alongside Ichigo versus Yhwach, and so one was favoured over the other. Uryu versus Hashwolf was mostly off-screen, only crescendoing right at the end, barreling headfirst into a rushed and ultimately unsatisfying conclusion. A metaphor, perhaps, for the story itself. These are some of the biggest plot points that may be left hanging in the balance when the wake of these 5 chapters is revealed to us, though there's obviously a litany of other smaller points too. And of course, we don't yet know how these final 5 chapters will play out exactly. Maybe the merger will still happen, or at the very least be activated, only for Sukuna to finally be defeated for good in that moment. For me, I'm most disappointed in how Kenjaku was handled as a villain. His defeat and death was abrupt and anticlimactic, and I had held on to some hope, foolishly evidently, that he might return in some form to try and see out his plan. But with the ending so close, it now makes sense that that was never going to be. The enormous role he played in Yuji's life is also going to go mostly unaddressed, and it's just such a shame that, in my opinion, Jujutsu Kaisen's most fascinating present-day villain kind of disappeared with little more than a whimper. But what's next? The series is coming to a close, but obviously there is much still to enjoy. The anime will return for Season 3 in the near future, and who knows what the future holds in general for Jujutsu Kaisen. For my final comparison, take another look at Bleach. Back in 2016, as I read the last few chapters and realised that the series wasn't going to end in the way I had wanted it to, it simply wasn't going to address so much of the lore, so many questions, I had no idea, and really could have only dreamed, and did only dream, that the series would be in such a strong position now, almost 10 years later after that disappointing ending. The 1000-Year Blood War arc anime is very popular and being handled extremely well, and who knows? Maybe the Hell arc will be a thing after all, or maybe we'll just keep on coping about it for the rest of time. We're all just going to have to wait and see where that's concerned. But the main message I want you to take away from this video from someone who has been here before in a very similar position, and let's face it, I think things were left a little messier with Bleach ultimately than they are being left now, is that it's not the end. The main thing is to ensure an enduring community continues to rally around the series. And I certainly think we'll continue to see that in the short to mid-term, especially thanks to the anime. But yeah, that's it for my thoughts on the ending of Jujutsu Kaisen. It is certainly very abrupt, even though it has mostly felt like we were getting there. Slowly but surely, it is now suddenly here with the force of a freight train, as these things always tend to do. It was exactly the same with Bleach. I kind of felt foolishly maybe it will go on forever, even though we're in the final arc, and then suddenly one day you wake up, and that moment, the one you thought would never arrive, finally has. I hope I was able to offer a slightly different perspective based on someone who, almost 10 years ago, went through pretty much the exact same thing with the ending of Bleach. But do let me know down in the comments below how you feel about Jujutsu Kaisen coming to an end in just 5 chapters. What's been your thoughts on the story as a whole, on this final arc of the Shinjuku Showdown? And crucially, how do you think the story is going to end? How are these last 5 chapters going to be used? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below, and once again I do apologise for not releasing a Jujutsu Kaisen video sooner than this. Now the series is ending apparently, but there will still be videos to come in the future, especially as we tackle the anime when that releases later on down the line. Alright everyone, thank you so very much for watching. I hope you took something away from this video of value, and I really hope you enjoyed it. As always, I want to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply wouldn't be able to do this. If you love what I do here over on YouTube and you too want to support me, you can do just that by visiting the link to my Patreon in the description of this video. By supporting me there for $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits of every single video like this, as one of the people who really does help make these happen. And by supporting me at the $2 level or higher, you can get every single video I release absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Alright everyone, but that's it from me. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.